All right, thank you for having me. I want to present on sustainable backyard chicken production. And my interest here is for people who are about to start backyard chicken and then maybe first timer that will really enjoy what I have because I want them to look at the benefits, the challenges, and what best practices is there for them to be able to take on backyard chicken. All right. So what are we going to learn today? We're going to look at some of the advantages we have when we do sustainable backyard chicken. We're going to look at the benefit for environment, healthier food for our family, cost effectiveness, and then the aspect of education and self-sufficiency. We're also going to look at some of the challenges you might encounter when you want to go into raising backyard chicken. We'll talk about space and housing, predator and pest control, time commitment, health. And then at the end of the day, we'll look at the best practices that we need to adopt in raising backyard chicken. Now, it's very important for us to also identify some of the terminologies, especially if we are the first time farmers or first time keeper of chickens. We'll definitely have to come across a lot of terminologies, but I'm going to look at the basic one. Rooster, for instance, is a male chicken, which includes cock and cockerels. And then meat broiler birds, those are the ones that are kept for meats. Then the layer breed, those are kept for layers. And then the dual purpose breeds are those ones that are kept for both meat and milk. Recently, we also have another kind of classification that is coming up already, which may not be under what we call the meat birds or the layer bird or the dual purpose bird. We have the ornamental breed, the companion bird, or the hobby bird. A lot of people are keeping birds now for companionship, for hobby, and it's very difficult for us to be able to put them in that category. So these are just breeds of chicken that is raised primarily for show or for exhibition or for pleasure. And then when we talk about co-op, we mean an enclosure, something like a housing where chicken are kept safe and secure. And then a run is a fenced or an enclosed outdoor where chicken could be able to have access to some kind of space and exercise. Now, I have this picture from somewhere in Africa. The importance of this picture is that most of the chicken you find around those parts of the world is chickens that are lightweight, mixed breed. You cannot identify whether this chicken is Bantam, is Cornish, is Rhode Island Red. And this has been happening for a long generation. They are very good layers, highly adaptable to their environment. And this is a very good aspect of local or backyard chicken. Because if we have backyard chicken that are well adapted to your environment and then the use of available resources in terms of their housing, it's really going to go a long way in cost effectiveness. You can see the building, one of the kind of small housing in Africa that these chicken are allowed to stay. They are made from affordable material. So now to the United States. Poultry, particularly chicken, is gaining a lot of traction in the United States, especially backyard chicken. And because a lot of people have been seeing the advantages that are involved when you raise your own chicken, such as you know where your food comes from, you reduce environmental impact, and then you eat and live healthier because you know what you are giving your chicken and you know what you are consuming from it. So a lot of interest. And because of this interest, I really want to do something on poultry and improve on what we have here in the US. So for a first timer, what are some of the advantages that they can have when they do sustainable backyard chicken? One of such is the environmental benefit, waste reduction. We know that around the household, sometimes we have food scraps, we have materials that we may not be able to consume because they are already going bad. Most of these chickens are point where they can easily consume this material and make it into better manure for better fecal dropping. And this is another important aspect that people who keep environmentally friendly chicken will help in the reduction of waste. Now, we also have this aspect of lower carbon footprint. We know that the eggs we consume, the meat we consume, are basically produced from somewhere and are usually transported to where we buy them at the groceries. But when we raise our local chicken, when we raise our backyard chicken, we cut down this carbon emission because there is no need for these trucks to travel far and near trying to distribute these materials at grocery shops and all that. Biodiversity is also another good advantages when we have our backyard chicken because they can easily control insect and pests within the home because they naturally feed on them and then naturally fertilize the plant. Now, by the time we keep this backyard chicken, we also have healthier food. These days, it's very important for us to know what we eat. And by the time we are producing what we eat in terms of fresh eggs and meat, is another big advantage because it helps you to actually appreciate where your food comes from, how it gets to the table. And this is another important aspect when it comes to eating healthy. And then because you are keeping your own backyard chicken, there is less exposure to chemicals. Chemicals like the use of antibiotics and hormones is usually at a very minimum stage and sometimes entirely no antibiotics and no hormone. And this usually lead to cleaner food. We also have to look at cost effectiveness. When I got to Logan, I looked at it that most of the eggs that were sold in Logan have a very low price, about $6. But right now, you can see that we have eggs going as high as $10 in the grocery. So by the time you give backyard chicken for egg laying, you raise a lot of money by selling the eggs. You also get meat from them, and maintenance is low compared to other livestock. So it's something we can look at it because it's very important for us to be able to produce what we eat. And then when you raise this chicken, you appreciate the education and the self-sufficiency that goes in. You now appreciate where your food come from, especially if you have younger ones at home, kids, for example, they begin to learn how the meat they eat in terms of broilers or in terms of eggs, how it is produced, they begin to learn the basic aspect of animal care, which at the longer run is going to impact on them. And there is also increased self-sufficiency because you are adding to food production within the country, which is very, very good. Now, having known some of the advantages that we have when we raise backyard chicken, we also need to know that we can also encounter challenges, especially for first timer or those who intended to raise backyard chicken. The first and most important aspect of the challenges you're going to face is whether you have the space. Space is very important. By the time you are done with the space, you need to think of what housing will you use. And because chicken needs enough room to roam around, to forage, and to exercise, it's always very good for us to take into consideration if we want to go into backyard chicken, if we have the space, and if we do have the space, what about the housing? We also talk about predator and pest control. Once you have chickens at home, you are inviting predators. And these predators may range from raccoons, foxes, and hawks. So this is another big challenge. And when you want to go into this kind of production, you need to think very well, how do you control predator? How do you do the pest control? Strong fencing, secure copes, and then when you use your management in the way that predators are kept at bay, you will definitely enjoy the production of backyard chicken. Another aspect of the challenges that a lot of first-timers have is time commitment. We know that in the morning you need to do a daily kind of routine, feed them, change their water, collect eggs, and maintain their co-op. So all these require time. So going into poultry production, though, when we look at the attention given during poultry or backyard chicken, is not compared to what you have for dairy, for sheep and goat, and maybe for rabbits. But it's also very worthy to understand that chicken needs daily care, and this daily care needs time. So you should be able to give out a portion of your time to be able to assess if really you are capable of keeping them. And then the health management is another big challenge that you need to consider, because by the time you bring in these chickens, you have to take care of any kind of management, the parasite management, if there is disease. So it needs a regular health check. And this is what you do when you have thorough observation, especially when the chickens are there. You need to observe to look at their behavior. You need to have a clean environment. So these are the basics. And then feed is another important aspect that we need to consider, especially when you want to go into backyard chicken. Sometimes we can have feeding that are affordable because you want to maximize profit at minimum cost. So you need to look at the feed cost, how affordable are the feeds you are supplying, and how do you store this feed properly? Because feeds that are stored for a very long time is not proper to be used as chicken feeds because it loses all the vital nutrients that are in it after a few months. So you need to have that consideration too. Then, what are the best practices? We have looked at some of the advantages that we can have when we raise backyard chicken. We also have seen the challenges that we can encounter by the time we raise backyard chicken. Now, what are the best practices for us in raising backyard chicken? The first thing you need to know once you have the space, you need to look for proper housing. What housing will you use? Is the crop you're going to buy, is it secure? Is it well ventilated? Is it spacious? Is it clean? And what kind of bedding will you use? And it's always very important that when you have your co-op, the co-op should have at least 2 to 3 square feet per bed. That is within the co-op, and about 8 to 10 square feet in the outdoor run. This will allow the animal, the chicken, to be able to exercise freely. And then the space is also very good that we need to clean regularly. By the time we clean regularly, we help to prevent ammonia buildup. And ammonia buildup and disease is one of the biggest problems when you have backyard chicken, especially when the number is very large. So we need to have this consideration, and this is one of the housing type that we could take a look at. We have several kind of co-op that we could buy. The most important thing you need to consider is how affordable they are, how secure they are, how well ventilated these co-ops are. And you could have a co-op that can take 1 to 3 chickens, can take 6 to 10 chickens, can even take between 0 to 50 chicken, particularly the bigger one on my right. So these are some of the basics of the co-op that you need to have. And you should also identify the number of birds you want to keep. If you are able to identify the number of birds you want to keep, it will also help you to be able to do your selection when it comes to coop purchase. I'm showing you part of affordable house material from some part of Africa. The idea is that when you use material for co-op, or when you want to have structures built for you, you need to look at how affordable these structures are and what security can they guarantee that your chicken will not be preyed upon, and then the health aspect will be well maintained. So this photo you're seeing is coming from somewhere in Africa where they use locally available materials to be able to do chicken co-ops, chicken housing, so that the chicken will have all the affordability in terms of space, security, in terms of space and security. So we have okay. We have the second aspect that we need to look at, especially in terms of best practice, feed and feeding. The feed quality is very important, that you should identify good feed meal that will not sell old feeds. And then by the time you have those kind of feed meal, you should be able to identify if the feeds are fresh. We don't want to give our best stale, moldy, or rancid feeds. And we should do all we can to regularly feed our bird with the best kind of feed quality that will bring out the best production. Because the idea about keeping poultry, especially chicken, is to maximize profit. And if your feed, which is close to 50 to 70% of the cost of production, is bad, then definitely you will have problem raising this chicken. And the advantages of identifying quality feeds is that it helps you to identify better performance in your chicken. They lay better eggs when you give them good quality feeds. And if you are keeping for meat, they deposit a lot of flesh, which is also very good. But how do we preserve this feed? It is also very important that we should preserve our feed, keep it away from places that are wet so that they don't have coccidiosis, especially in wet environment. And as a rule, it is best not to feed feeds that are over 2 to 3 months old in storage to birds, because the vitamin content and other mineral contents will definitely degrade over time. So feed and feeding is one of the best qualities that you could use. And when we have our scavenging birds, especially those ones within our homestead vicinity, we could feed them with some scraps, some fruit, veggies. This is very important because it helps them to like forage properly. And then if you have layer beds, you also may want to feed a grit or oyster shell to help in digestion and also to help in eggshell formation. So these are some of the basic. Now, how do we understand what kind of chickens we could raise? Now, there are crude protein level. And when I mean by crude protein level, I mean those level of protein that will be the best for that chicken and makes it perform perfectly without poor performance. Now, by the time we have the three categories of chicken we talked about earlier, especially the meat chicken, the egg chicken, the dual purpose chicken, the average group protein for 0 to 4 weeks for meat chicken is usually 23% group protein. At that level, you need to give them more protein for them to grow. And we don't need to have much problem with this because most of the feed meal had already had all the ingredients that is required for this chicken. So is for you to identify which of these kind of chicken are you keeping. If you are keeping chicken for meat type, you have to buy feedstuff that had about 23% crude protein at the beginner, and then by the time you want to finish up, you reduce the protein level by 1 or 2%, maybe to 20 or 21%. The same with the egg chicken, the protein level should be around 20, 21 from 0 to 6 weeks. But at the point of laying, you need to reduce the protein content because at that level, you don't want them to have a lot of fat, the abdominal fat portion, which will interfere with egg laying. But for the dual purpose chicken, it's very easy for you to feed them because they both produce meat and egg. So that makes it very easy. Any kind of feed that is in between the meat type chicken and that of the egg type chicken is just adequate for this group of chicken. Group protein of 20, 21, And then at finishing phases, you can use a crude protein of 15 to 19. Now, heating and lighting is another important aspect of backyard poultry production. At day old, or when you buy your chicks, these chicks are very undefended, they are very fragile, and then they don't have the feather that will now help them to be able to adapt to heat source or to adapt to cold. So there is a need for us to also provide a heating atmosphere and then a lighting for them to help them to be able to eat. Within the US, they use about 250 watt infrared light. This could be increased depending on what you have and then the temperature at what point in time. But by the time we want to look at the temperature range, especially for brooders, we could have the temperature of about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. But by the time the birds are growing from each week, as they're progressing from week 1, week 2, week 3, it's always very important that we begin to reduce the temperature of the brooder at that point so that the temperature will be reducing while the birds are already growing feathers to be able to adapt to the changing temperature. Now, chicks are themselves the thermometer because in most of the homes, sometimes we don't have what we use to be able to identify whether the heat is high or the heat is low or the heat is adequate. So you need to have a way of observing this animal. If the chicks looks too hot, they'll definitely move away from source of heat. And if they look too cold, they will have to come together towards the source of heat. So there is a need for us to continue to adjust the temperature as we observe what we have in our farm. And observation is one of the key aspects of management because you can easily identify whether the heat source is adequate, whether the heat source is poor. Now, we have this picture that shows an evenly distribution of chicks in a brooding house. This shows that the heating source is adequate because the chicken are well spread. And by the time you observe, you see that they are doing very well, they are eating, and that is one of the aspects that you need to identify, especially if you are brooding your chicks as you bring them into your brooding house. Heat source is very important because it needs to regulate their body temperature. So when you see that the chicken are well spread, evenly distributed, then it's an idea that yes, the heat source is good. It's not always easy for us to have thermometers right in the farm, especially in a very rural setting. So by the time we identify that the chicken themselves could be the source of thermometer by observing their behavior, then it makes it more easy. Now, if you look at the second photo, this photo shows that the chicks are clustered around themselves. And when you see this kind of clustering, it shows that the heat source is not adequate. It means you need to increase the source of heat. And if they are not adequate, then these chickens, the chicks will not eat. And if they don't eat, then performance will always be affected. The third picture I have here is also shows an inadequate kind of heating. You know, you see the chicks moving away from the source of heat, going to the borders of your pen or or the house or the where you have them. When you begin to notice this kind of segregation or separation, is an indication that the source of heat is too much, and then you need to reduce it. Especially if you use double bulb, maybe of 150 watt, 150 watt, and you see that they are running away from the source of heat, is the right time for us to remove one of the bulb so that we also observe that the heat is well and is adequate for them to eat and then to do all their activities. Now, how do we take care of predator when we have it? Predator would definitely come to the house, come to your backyard once they begin to notice that you have chicken. So the first and most important thing is to secure your chicken. And how do you secure your chicken? First is to install fencing, some kind of fencing. When you install fencing, you should also have to secure the co-op. Securing the co-op involves having a good lock on it, especially to prevent nocturnal predators, those predators that will come at night to affect or to kill your chicken. So this is very, very important. And not only that, rodents are another big problem that we can face whenever we have a backyard chicken. So we should maintain a rodent control program around the poultry house. We could use wire mesh, and then we could also cover windows, the vent openings, and then we should also try as much as possible to be very observant if there is any creeping material, footstep of predators, and then see how we will weigh them off. Then we should also ensure that doors and windows are fitly tight so that you don't have to forget locking your doors. And that is why we said backyard poultry may have some kind of time commitment, because you need to check regularly. You need to seal all the cracks and crevices so that some kind of harmful insect may not creep into the co-op. So the houses should also be well locked to prevent unwanted visitors like the raccoons and others. Then, having said that, there is a need for us to do our regular health checks. Our regular health checks means that you need to monitor the animal for any signs of illness. And what are some of these illness when you notice that the animal is off feet? Because observation is very key at this point in time. You need to see whether they are eating as they should. You also need to look at their stool. You also need to look at their feathers. Is it wrongful? And you also need to monitor mortality. If you have any case of mortality, it's always good for you to report, to be able for veterinarians to be able to assess what kind of disease that is happening. Because if you don't do that, it becomes a big problem. So observation in terms of illness, feather loss, or change in egg production or feed consumption is very, very key when you want to observe that. And why we have to do this regular health check is that we around Logan, we live in the areas of migratory birds. And these birds sometimes, especially in open backyard chicken, you see them mix with our birds and they can easily transfer viruses which may affect our birds. So we should try as much as possible to limit contact with wild birds. And then by the time you have all this sorted out, you need to also look at the local regulations. In many states, they have their own regulation of the number of birds you can keep, the number of rooster you can keep, and all that. So it's always good to look at what regulation we have locally. And by the time we know some of these regulation, it will help us to now identify the number of animals we can keep conveniently. For example, in the US, in Utah, these are some of the regulations that we have in Utah. If you want to like keep a backyard chicken, the zoning laws varies from county to counties. Some county will not allow you to keep roosters. Others will want you to keep one or two roosters. And then you should also know that you need to adopt biosecurity measures to prevent spread of disease. And if you have 3 or more chicken, those chicken must be registered as backyard poultry with the Utah Department of Agriculture. And roosters are allowed in some areas, like I said earlier. In other areas, roosters are not allowed. So it's always good for us to check with our local extension offices within the local government or the county to know what rules we have in place for backyard chicken so that we don't go breaking the law where we try to keep local chickens. In conclusion, we have seen that there are a lot of advantages keeping local chickens because it helps us to have fresh food and also it reduces environmental impact. However, to be able to produce or keep local chickens, backyard chicken, there is every requirement for you to carefully plan because it involves time. It involves a lot of processes for you to be able to achieve this. So by the time you have this in mind, then you should be ready to embark on backyard chicken. So this is basically the few information I have for first time backyard chicken farmer and then intended farmer. Now we have a small group we have that we also will appreciate. We're trying to look at a few survey of how we can help our farmers that keep small acreage livestock. And this survey is here for you to be able to answer them. You can click on the QR code or the link and then try to answer this question. It will help us to better serve you better, whether you are in poultry production, whether you are in sheep and goat, whether you are in any kind of micro livestock. Please take your time to go through this link and be able to answer them so that we'll be able to solve some of the challenging problems we have in small acreage livestock production. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. We appreciate all the information that you shared. There are a few questions, and we've got about 7 more minutes here. So I'll read you a few questions if you don't mind answering them.
Hey, Andrea, real quick.
Yes.
I went ahead and put a link to that survey in the chat box. And
Perfect.
we really super duper appreciate everybody being willing to fill that out, if you will, but that way you can just go directly to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Okay, so one of the questions is, what is the best way to get rid of mites?
Well, we have, okay. Can I go?
Yeah, just
talk. Now, the best way to get rid of mites itself is biological control, because these few days, a lot of people will not want to use chemicals because you have a problem with the soil and other activities. So the best way sometimes is to have a way of having some kind of animals who feed on them, like the cats, and then other smaller poultry animals, they feed on them. So it's easy for you to be able to have them, and then they eat is a source of protein for them.
Sorry, not mice, mites.
Okay. Something like rat, right?
No, like the little bugs that get into the feathers, like red mites.
Oh, all right. Yeah, this is also a very big challenge, especially for poultry farmers who may encounter this kind of stuff. But the most important is that we have this powder that you pour it on and it removes most of those mites. But the best aspect of having preventive measure is to make sure that you have your co-op very clean, and then you regularly, by the time you want to bring the poultry in, you need to do a proper disinfectants. And once in every 6 months, you should have the co-op well cleaned and well disinfected. When you do this, you minimize to the barest level mite infestation in your chicken.
Okay, thank you. Kimball says, I have always heard chicken manure has a lot of ammonia in it. Is this true? And his experience is that when he dumps the manure in the garden, the plants don't do very well. If it's true that manure has any other kind of strong chemical, what is it? And any ideas how to offset its potency before putting it in the garden?
Yeah, poultry dropping has a lot of manure. I mean, a lot of ammonia buildup in it. And it is not advisable to take them immediately and put it in the farm. You need to allow time to pass for degradation to happen and then you just have to put them in the soil so that soil microbe will try to break it down. And as they break it down, they break it into similar nitrates that is fixed in the soil for you to use. What I do is that you need to allow for close to 5 to 6 months to be able to use those ammonia. But if you use it directly, you are not going to have the yield you have, because ammonia is like a gas, and then because it builds up, it will destroy all the plants. So it's always good for you. In some part of the world, they dry it first, and because it is gaseous, by the time you dry them, a lot of these impurity escape, and then you just put them in the farm and allow it to stay for some time, allow the rains to come, allow other burrowing animal to do some kind of degradation on it, and then you can use it. Once you use it at that point in time, you will have a better yield. But do not use it fresh from the farm, and do not use it within the first three months of harvest from your farm, because it has not been well degraded. So it's going to cause a lot of challenge if you do any kind of cropping with it.
So just to bridge back, there was a similar question asked to Dr. Rhonda Miller about manure use and compost, and she mentioned that it really depends on how much you put on. So a very small amount in your garden may not be a big deal, but a lot, it's definitely much better to compost it first. So Misty asked, should excess chicken feed be composted?
Well, I think it's a good idea to compost it, because the ingredients that you have in the feeds are not bad ingredients. They are quite rich. You're talking about some vital minerals, some vital nutrients and all that. So if you compost it, it's going to be better, because the soil can reutilize them and then return it back as food by the time you crop your material. However, caution should be taken so that you don't begin to bring more worm infestation into your home, especially when you have stale feeds, and then you have feeds that is already infested with coccidiosis as a result of water leakage and all that. So it's a good idea, if you have the time and you have the resources, you should compost them.
Okay. And are rinsed eggshells safe to grind and use?
I didn't get that.
Rinsed eggshells. So once you crack the eggs open, are you able to reuse the eggshells for amendments to your garden, or some people feed them back to their chickens?
Well, in modern practice, if you want to look at it from modern aspect of backyard poultry productions, once you crack the egg, is always safe for you to dispose them, because there might be sources of disease to the animal you are feeding. But if you have this cracked egg, the bag, in large quantity, it's always good for you to do some kind of heat treatment. And then when you do some kind of heat treatment, it will definitely help you dry them, and then you can now make it into any kind, because they are also quite rich in calcium and phosphorus. So, but it's not ideal that by the time you have a cracked one, you just feed them directly to the backyard poultry chicken, because you're going to pass on infection, maybe some kind of bacteria or other microbial activities around the egg to the chicken. So we need to try and look at the possibility of keeping our chicken healthy at all points, not introducing disease ourselves, because the handling and then the number of period, or maybe number of time that egg has moved from one location to another, it has exchanged hands. So you need to be very careful when you feed those things. But for me, if I want to give you an advice, do not do that.